What does a player do when his club tells him that he is not going to negotiate his departure under any concept? Julián Álvarez already has the answer, and that answer has been in the hands of FIFA for hours. What FIFA can do to Atlético de Madrid, if it decides to act in this case, is to put at risk something that Atlético values more than anything else in European football. If you are a fan, give it a like right now because Julián Álvarez has just done something that no Spanish football player had ever done to force his signing. And subscribe because when FIFA gives the ultimatum to Atlético de Madrid, we will tell you here before anywhere else. But to understand how we got here, we have to go to yesterday morning to Cerro del Espino, exactly an hour before the training of Atlético de Madrid began, when the television cameras waiting at the door of the sports city to capture the reunion between Julián and Simeone still did not know that something much more important was happening inside that building than any image they could record from the outside. Julián Álvarez arrived at Cerro del Espino accompanied by his agent Fernando Hidalgo and Sergio Diaz, his trusted man. They did not arrive together by chance. They arrived together because Julián had asked for an urgent meeting with the club management. A meeting alone with the two people who, within Atlético de Madrid, have the real power to make decisions about their future. Gil Marín, the club's CEO, and Simeone, the coach. The four of them met in a room at Cerro del Espino an hour before the session began. No cameras, no press, no messages. Only four people around a table with a conversation that, according to the sources this channel knows, lasted more than an hour, and that, at the end, left Julián with the certainty that he needed to activate a plan that, until that moment, he had preferred not to use because of the consequences it could have for his relationship with the club. Julián and his agent were completely direct from the beginning. That Julián's desire was to leave Atlético de Madrid, that he wanted the club to start negotiations with Barça immediately, that they had been clear about that intention for months, both in public and in private, and that what they asked in that meeting was that Atlético take the step that Julián needed to be able to close his future in the way that he considered correct for his career. Gil Marín and Simeone's response was exactly the same as in previous conversations, that Atlético de Madrid was not going to sit down to negotiate with Barça under any possible circumstance, that if Barcelona wanted Julián, they had a very clear way of getting him, which was to pay his retirement clause, entirely without any discounts of any kind, and that if no one paid that clause, Julián Álvarez would continue to be a player for Atlético de Madrid and Simeone fully counted on him to face the season that was about to begin with great goals. Julián insisted with all the determination he was able to gather. According to the sources this channel knows, he even came to beg at that meeting. He told Simeone with all the clarity possible that he did not want to continue at Atlético for another year, that his head was not in the red and white project, that if the club decided to retain him against his will, Atlético would lose a player who, on the field, would not be able to give his best version, because his mental state would not allow it under any possible pressure. It was at that moment when Simeone did something that no one expected him to do at that meeting. Instead of responding to Julián's veiled threat about his performance, he completely changed his tone and spoke to him about Antoine Griezmann. He told him what the Frenchman confessed to him when he returned to Atlético after his years at Barça. About the difference between what Griezmann expected to find in Barcelona and what he really found. About how a player who arrived at Barça thinking he was going to live the most important experience of his career ended up discovering something that Simeone summarized with clarity, that according to the sources that this channel knows, left Julián thinking more than he himself expected at that moment. That in Barcelona they are more aware of what Real Madrid does than of building something of their own. That when the real moments in the Champions League come, Barça loses. That Griezmann returned to Atlético not only because the club wanted him, but because he missed something that he never found in Barcelona in the same way. The true feeling, the real belonging, the certainty that when a player wears that red and white shirt, the bond with the fans is something that no title can make and that no project can replicate from scratch with the same emotional depth. Simeone did not tell Julián that he could not leave. He told him to think it over, to make sure that what he thought he was going to find at Barça was really what he was going to find, that Griezmann thought the same thing he was thinking and that Griezmann returned. The meeting ended without any agreement. Julián left the field with the rest of the team and Simeone, during training, put him as a starter alongside Luckman in the attack. He gave him minutes with the first ones. He showed him in a practical and forceful way that within the field he was going to have the prominence that in previous seasons he had not always had consistently. It was the clearest message that Simeone could send without words, that if Julián stayed, he was going to be an indisputable starter, that Atletico really needed him, that there was a real project where he was a fundamental piece for the objectives of the season. Julián trained, worked with his teammates, with the professionalism that he has always shown within the field. He did exactly what a professional has to do, regardless of the internal storm that he has been carrying for weeks. And when he finished training, he picked up the phone and called his agent. Julián heard everything Simeone told him about Griezmann, and according to the sources this channel knows, what El Cholo transmitted to him made him reflect more than he expected. But it was not enough to change the decision he had already made. The second message was given to the market directly, because during those hours Julián knew something that accelerated all his internal plans, that Barça already had a concrete plan be prepared in case the signing was not closed in this market, that if the transfer did not take place this summer, Deco was going to move in another direction without waiting any longer, and that the next market would arrive with Barça already reinforced in that position and with far fewer urgent needs to sign him. That was what changed everything inside Julián's head when he finished that training. Not the meeting, not Griezmann's advice, not the titularity offered, but the certainty that if he did not act immediately, Barca's train could go without him forever, and that Julián was not going to accept. That's why he picked up the phone as soon as he finished training, that's why he called his agent without waiting a minute, and that's why he gave him instructions that, according to the sources this channel knows exclusively, no Spanish football player had ever given in a market situation as blocked and as desperate as the one Julián was living. What Julián ordered his agent on that call, and what that could mean for Atletico Madrid in the next weeks of European competition, is exactly what we tell now. Because what Julián activated that afternoon is something that no Spanish football player had activated before, and Atletico Madrid still does not know exactly the size of the problem they have on the table. The instruction that Julián Álvarez gave his agent that afternoon has a name that, in the world of professional football, very few players have dared to pronounce ever in a market situation like this. Take their case to FIFA. Formally ask the top football institution in the world to study their situation in detail, to intervene officially, to force Atletico Madrid to do something that the club has been categorically refusing to do for weeks. Negotiate. Julián did not make that decision impulsively or reflexively. He had been talking for days with his legal team about whether there was a specific mechanism within FIFA's regulations that could help him in a situation like his. A player who has publicly and repeatedly expressed his desire to leave a certain club, who has asked in multiple private meetings with the management to facilitate his transfer in an orderly manner, who has a specific offer from another first-line world club, and whose club refuses to sit down to negotiate under no condition that it is not the full payment of a rescission clause that no club is willing to pay in these circumstances. Is there a legal figure within FIFA's regulations that protects the player in a situation as blocked as that? The answer that Julián received from his specialized legal team was one that gave him hope and some fear at the same time. It does exist, but it has a price. FIFA's regulations contemplate that when a player expresses in a public and documented manner his desire to leave a club, that desire must be taken into account by the institution to which it belongs. That a club cannot act indefinitely against the player's declared desire without significant regulatory consequences. That if Atletico Madrid continues to block the exit of a player who is asked to leave on multiple occasions and publicly and repeatedly, FIFA can intervene directly and force the club to sit down to negotiate formally. That is the good news for Julián, the one he needed to hear to make the final decision without going back, the one that confirms that there is a legal exit within the very system of organized football capable of unlocking a situation that otherwise would remain indefinitely blocked while Atletico Madrid had the political will to maintain that unwavering stance. But there is bad news, and the bad news is what makes this path that Julián has chosen so extraordinary, so unusual, so revealing of the level of despair to which the Argentine striker has arrived in his attempt to force his departure from Atletico Madrid. Because the FIFA regulations that support Julián in this situation include a condition that no player in full economic capacity would accept under normal circumstances. If the player wants FIFA to intervene to force his club to negotiate, and if FIFA determines that the club has acted against the will of the player will have to pay a part of the salary corresponding to the years he has left of contract to be able to formalize his departure. In the specific case of Julián Álvarez, that means money, a lot of money from his own pocket, an amount that his legal team is calculating right now with precision, and that according to the sources close to his environment that this channel knows exclusively, is not a small or symbolic figure, given the very high salary level that the Argentine striker has in Atletico Madrid. Julián accepted that economic condition without hesitation for a moment, without asking for additional time to think about it more calmly, without consulting with more people than he had already consulted during the previous days. Because for Julián Álvarez at this time, money is not the problem is time. Every day that goes by without the signing being closed is a day that Barça can be looking in another direction, a day that the market is closer to its closure, a day that the plan B of Deco becomes more likely. And Julián prefers to pay part of his own salary to stay one more year at Atlético Madrid, seeing how his dream moves away while the market closes without him. The case of Julián Álvarez is already in the hands of FIFA. The GAL team of the striker presented the necessary documentation, the formal request for intervention, the evidence that Julián has publicly and repeatedly expressed his desire to leave, the conversations documented with the club's management, everything that FIFA needs to study the case and make a decision. And the first response that has arrived from FIFA, according to the sources that this channel knows exclusively, is the one that confirms that the case has been admitted to trial, that the legal services are studying the situation of Julián Álvarez with Atlético, and that in the coming weeks FIFA will take a formal position on whether the club has acted against the will of the player in a way that justifies its intervention. This means that Atlético Madrid will receive in the coming weeks an official statement that absolutely no football club wants to receive ever. An official statement from FIFA asking for explanations about the situation of one of its players, asking why a footballer who is asked on multiple occasions to facilitate his transfer is still held against his will, and warning him that if FIFA determines that the club has acted contrary to the rules, the consequences can go far beyond a simple financial fine. There is something about Julián's decision that deserves to be analyzed, because when a player takes their case to FIFA, it is not just a legal decision, it is a statement that says with all the clarity in the world that that player has reached the point in which no other tool available seems sufficient to solve what he considers an unfair and unsolvable situation in other ways. Julián did not reach this point in a capricious way. He arrived after months of requests that Atlético has ignored, after meetings that have not produced any result, after public statements that the club has responded reiterating that it will not negotiate, after a meeting of more than an hour in which Simeone spoke to him about Griezmann, and Gil Marín repeated the same position as always. Julián exhausted all options before reaching this, and that says something important about what he is willing to do to get what he wants. That there is no limit. That he is willing to pay money from his own pocket. That he is willing to face the club that gives him food. That he is willing to turn what should be a market negotiation into an international legal procedure before the highest institution of world football. Julián respects Simeone. What happened in that meeting was not a fight. It was a conversation between a coach who believes that Julián is about to make a mistake, and a player who believes that his future is elsewhere. Two people who see the same situation in different ways. And when that happens, the only way is to look for a solution outside that room. That is exactly what Atlético Madrid has right now on the table. Not only the request of a player who wants to leave, but the determination of someone who has decided that he is going to leave in the way that is necessary, although that costs him economically much more than anyone expected. And FIFA is right now at the center of all this. What those consequences can mean for Atlético Madrid and for their participation in this season's Champions League is exactly what we tell now in the last part of this story that this channel tells you exclusively, before anyone else in the world of football. Atlético Madrid has a problem that 48 hours ago did not exist in this specific dimension. It had a player who wanted to leave. That had been going on for weeks. But now it has something qualitatively different and much more serious. It has a player who wants to leave and who has found a way to turn that personal desire into an international legal procedure, with FIFA as the supreme referee. And that changes the nature of the problem in a fundamental way, which the directors of the club Rojiblanco will have to process with much more urgency than they have shown so far in this entire process. Because FIFA is not Barça. FIFA is not Deco, calling Gil Marín with an offer that Atlético can reject with total tranquility. FIFA is the maximum institution that has the power to sanction a football club in ways that go far beyond any ordinary market negotiation. And what FIFA can do to Atlético Madrid if it determines that the club has acted against the will of Julián Álvarez in a way contrary to its regulations is something that in the Cerro del Espino they will have to take very seriously from now on without any possible delay. The most serious sanction that FIFA can impose on a club in a conflict like this is the prohibition of participating in international competitions for one or more seasons. In the case of Atletico Madrid, that means one thing with all its economic and sporting brutality. The Champions League. The tournament that Gil Marín and Simeone have put at the center of their objectives this season. The one that generates the most important income of the entire European club calendar. The one that fills the Metropolitano with the most expensive tickets of the season. The one that makes club sponsors renew their contracts with the most favorable conditions for the entity. Losing the Champions League because of a conflict with a player who has been asking to be sold for months, and the club has refused to listen, is the worst news that Atletico Madrid could receive at this delicate time of the season. And that news could arrive in a few weeks if FIFA determines that the club has acted in a way contrary to its regulations in the specific case of Julián Álvarez. In addition to the prohibition of participating in international competitions, FIFA can impose an economic sanction on Atletico that could exceed with increases any amount that Barça is willing to pay for Julián, which means that Atletico could end up losing more money for refusing to negotiate than the one they would have earned if they had agreed to sit down with Barça from the beginning when Julián asked for it for the first time. That is exactly what Julián Álvarez's legal team has calculated in great detail, along with their specialized lawyers, that the total cost of Atletico's unwavering stance can be much more expensive for the club, in economic and sporting terms, than the solution that Julián has been asking for months, clearly. And that when Gil Marín receives FIFA's official statement and his own legal advisors explain to him the real consequences of ignoring it, Atletico's stance can change in a radical way that no Barça offer had managed to change so far. FIFA will give its formal ultimatum to Atletico Madrid in the coming weeks, not in months, in weeks, because the case is already underway and because FIFA's procedures in conflict situations between players and clubs have deadlines that none of the parties can ignore without incurring very serious additional consequences for the infractor club. When that ultimatum arrives, Atletico Madrid will finally have to make a real decision, the same that it has been avoiding for weeks. Sit down to negotiate with Barça Julián's transfer in reasonable terms or maintain its total blockade stance and risk the very serious consequences that FIFA can impose if it determines that that stance is contrary to its regulations and to the fundamental rights of the player to decide his future. Gil Marín is a profoundly pragmatic man. He has managed Atletico Madrid for decades with a coldness and efficiency that very few Spanish football leaders can match. And when he has in front of him a report from his legal advisors explaining what it can cost the club to maintain the blockade stance in the face of what it would cost to negotiate with Barça, the decision he will make will be exactly the one that any experienced manager would take in such a compromised economic and sporting situation. The one that costs Atletico less money and less titles, both short-term and long-term, in all its competitions. And that final decision is the one that will finally unlock the signing of Julián Álvarez for FC Barcelona before the end of the season. Not because Atletico has changed its mind about whether it wants to sell its star striker, but because the real and concrete cost of not selling him will have become greater than the cost of doing so in economic and competitive terms. Which is exactly what Julián calculated with cold blood when he ordered his legal team to take their case to FIFA regardless of the personal and economic consequences of that extraordinary and unprecedented decision. There is something else that deserves to be said about what Julián has done this week before closing this unique story. Something that goes beyond the signing market and the Champions League and the legal procedures of FIFA and of all the millions that are moving around this case. Something that has to do with what it really means to be a player who believes in something enough to pay for his own pocket to get it, without even thinking twice. In modern football, players rarely risk their own money to force a transfer of this type. They threaten, declare in the press, refuse to train publicly. They do things that cost the club, but that don't cost them directly from their own pocket. What Julián has decided to do is completely different from all that. He has decided that if the system gives him the reason but demands him to pay part of his salary to exercise that fundamental right, he will pay that amount without bargaining or trying to find any other way to avoid it. That says something about Julián's level of conviction regarding his decision to sign for Barça. That it is not a preference, that it is not a whim, that it is something in which he believes so deeply that he is willing to sacrifice real money to get it. Barça is going to sign a player like that, a player who, when he wants something, there is no obstacle that stops him. Not an unmovable Atletico, not a FIFA with economic conditions, not a Simeone who talks to him about Griezmann with the best intentions in the world. For the fans of the club who are watching this video, there is something in this story that deserves to be said with total clarity. Julián Álvarez is going to get to Barça before the market closes. He is going to get there because he is willing to do whatever is necessary, regardless of personal or economic cost. He is going to get there because he has shown this week with his actions that he has the determination and intelligence that a player needs to succeed in the most demanding club in the world. And he is going to get there because Atletico Madrid is going to understand, with the help of FIFA, that the price of continuing to block the signing is too high to assume. This summer snake is burning his last chapters in the most unexpected way that anyone could have imagined. And only here are you going to find out everything that happens before anywhere else in football. Julián Álvarez wants to play for Barça and he's going to get it. Subscribe and like, because if you are a fan, this story is not over and everything that happens with Julián we tell here before anyone else.